Hello guys, good wishes to all of you. This is a BY-D.GAHAN presentation of English language. Today I will take up the third unit of the topic, The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khuswant Singh. Let's go into the text now. The writer says that when my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. The writer and his grandma went to the city after the writer's parents were well established in the city. That was a turning point in our relation, in our friendship. After the writer had gone to his city house to live with his parents, then there came a turning point. There was a twist in the friendship between the writer and his grandma. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. It was not possible on the part of my grandmother to come to school with me because he lived in the city house. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. The writer went to school in a motor bus, so the grandma could not accompany him to school. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. In the village, grandma was feeding the stray dogs, but in the city, there were no stray dogs, and grandma took to feeding the sparrows that visited our city house. These dogs were not found in the city, therefore, grandma started feeding the sparrows. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. And in due course of time, the writer became an adolescent and then he became an adult. The years rolled by, time passed by, we saw less of each other. The grandma and the writer, they had hardly any time to meet each other. The writer was always busy in his studies, so he got no opportunity to visit his grandmother. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. For some days, grandma continued to wake the writer up and got him ready for school, but when I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. After the writer returned from school, grandma would ask him what he was taught that day, what the teacher had taught him, and the writer would say, I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning, the law of gravity, the Archimedes principle, and the world being round, etc. And in reply to grandmother's query, the writer would say that today he learned little things of Western science meaning science which is taught in European countries and in the United States of America, like France, Germany, Spain, England, Brazil. The Western countries, and the science was developed there. So they were learning Western science and learning the law of gravity, and asked me these principles. These are the scientific theories which he was learning at school, the world being round. Also, he told his grandma that the world is not flat as you think, it is round. And all these things made grandma unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons. And it was out of the capability of a grandma to help the writer with his lessons. Then she did not believe in the things they taught at English school, and grandma was an orthodox lady, and she had no faith in the things that were taught at English school, and was distressed. There was no teaching about God and the scriptures. Grandma was very much disturbed. She was perturbed she was distressed, she was troubled to know that at the writer schools there was no teaching about God and the scriptures, because that was the Indian custom, Indian habit of teaching the students. That generally in those times Indian students learned about scriptures and God, because science was at its infancy in India at that time. So the students were learning about different scriptures and God, or about theology. One day I announced that we were being given music lessons. One day the writer said to his grandma, "Grandma, we are learning music lessons." She was very much disturbed, and the moment grandma heard it, she was very much disturbed. She was stunned, and she was petrified to listen, to know that the writer was learning music lessons, because to her music had lewd associations, meaning grandma thinks music had vulgar associations. Music is obscene. It is not meant for gentle folk. Music is lewd, meaning obscene, vulgar. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars. Music is the one-sided affair of harlots, harlots meaning the women of ill fame, and beggars, and not meant for gentle folk. It is not meant for gentle people. The music is the monopoly, meaning one-sided business of the harlots, meaning the prostitutes and the beggars. And she said nothing. Grandma was very much displeased. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. Though she did not say anything to the writer about his learning of music, she remained silent, and her silence implied that she did not approve the writer's learning of music at school. She rarely talked to me after that. Even she stopped talking to the writer after that. Then next, when I went up to the university, I was given a room of my own. The writer became a grown-up child. He no longer stayed with his grandma. He went up to the university after the completion of his college education, and then he was given a room of his own. He stayed in his own room, in a separate room. The common link of friendship was snapped. So his friendship with grandmother, the common friendship, his intimacy, his closeness with grandmother was severed, was snapped, came to a halt, was stopped. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation, and she did not have any other alternative but to accept her seclusion, loneliness, with a sense of surrendering, with resignation, with humility, with humbleness. She accepted her seclusion, loneliness, or solitary life. She rarely left her spinning wheel. Then, after that, grandmother took to the spinning wheel to talk to anyone, and she got no time to talk to anyone because she did not leave her spinning wheel. She spun thread on the spinning wheel from sunrise to sunset. She sat by her wheel spinning and reciting prayers. From the morning to the evening, she continuously sat beside her spinning wheel, spinning thread, and reciting prayers. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while, and she had some time for rest. In the afternoon she relaxed. At that time she had some spare time, however she spent her spare time on by feeding the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda breaking the bread into little bits, and she sat in the veranda, she broke the bread into little crumbs. At that time, hundreds of little birds collected around her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirrupings. And a large number of hundreds of birds, sparrows, collected around her, and they created a veritable bedlam of chirrupings. Veritable meaning exact or original, bedlam meaning a noisy place of chirrupings. The birds twittered around her in order to take breadcrumbs that grandmother threw to them, and the birds were extremely cheerful, They were twittering. They were making a noisy place, a veritable bedlam. The place became extremely noisy, says the writer. Veritable bedlam. Bedlam is a noisy place, a scene full of noise and confusion, a chaotic place. Veritable bedlam of chirrupings. Chirrupings meaning the twittering, the singing of the birds. Some birds even came and perched on her legs. The birds became very close to her, and they were fearless. They became so intimate to the grandmother that some of the birds came to her and perched, meaning sat on her legs, others on her shoulders. Some even sat on her head. Even the birds dared to sit on her heads. The grandma was so affectionate, so doting. The grandma looked upon the birds as perhaps her grandchildren. She loved them so much, and full of affection. And some sat even on her head. She smiled. Grandma enjoyed their company. Jocund company, enjoyed their merry company, the twittering of the birds, the chirruping of the birds. She smiled but never shooed them away. And grandma never tried to drive them away, to turn them away. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. And for her, this afternoon, when she relaxed, she began feeding the sparrows. And this was the happiest half hour of the time of the day for her. And remember that her grandma fed the sparrows for half an hour in the afternoon. And this half an hour was the most delightful time for a grandmother. And at the end, the video concludes here. If you like this video, then please share and subscribe it to your friends. I remain here, yours sincerely.